The sound of footsteps in my bedroom at 3 in the morning wasn't unusual anymore. What was unusual was hearing two sets of them, followed by hushed whispers and the soft creak of our king-sized bed, the one I'd bought with my inheritance. Money 5 years ago. I sat perfectly still in my study down the hall, watching the security feed from the hidden cameras I'd installed 6 months earlier. My husband Marcus was leading a very pregnant woman into our master bedroom, her swollen belly evident even in the dim hallway lighting. She had the audacity to run her fingers along the Egyptian cotton sheets as if she owned them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. This will be perfect for the nursery, she whispered, her voice carrying clearly through the audio system I'd had professionally installed throughout the house. The baby can sleep right here next to us. Marcus kissed her forehead tenderly, a gesture he hadn't shown me in over 2 years. Whatever you want, sweetheart. This is your home now. Your home. The irony was delicious. What Marcus didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that I owned far more than just the deed to our 7-bedroom estate in Malibu. I owned the deed to his soul, quite literally, and the contract would be coming due very soon. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of empowerment, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this amazing community. Let's dive in. My name is Dr. Evangeline Cross, and I've spent the last 15 years as one of the country's leading experts in contract law and corporate litigation. What most people don't realize is that my specialty isn't just business contracts, it's finding loopholes in agreements that others consider ironclad. It's understanding the true power of words, especially when people don't read the fine print. Marcus had never bothered to read the fine print. I watched through the cameras as he helped his mistress, Jessica, a 24-year-old Instagram influencer he'd met at one of his real estate seminars, unpack her designer luggage into my walk-in closet. She was carelessly pushing aside my Chanel suits and Hermes bags to make room for her cheap knockoffs. I can't believe we're finally together, she cooed, wrapping her arms around his neck. No more sneaking around, no more lies. Marcus pulled her close, his hands resting on her pregnant belly. I know, baby. I should have left Evangeline years ago. She's always been so cold, so focused on her career. Not like you understand what's really important. I allowed myself a small smile as I opened the thick folder sitting on my mahogany desk. Inside were documents that would make Marcus wish he'd paid more attention during our marriage counseling sessions, specifically the part where I'd suggested we sign some protective agreements to safeguard our individual assets. He'd been so eager to protect his precious real estate portfolio that he'd signed everything I put in front of him without question. The prenuptial agreement, the property transfer documents, the business partnership papers, and most importantly, the sole contract. Marcus thought he was so clever, building his empire while I supported him through law school, through his early career struggles, through the years when his big dreams were just fantasies scribbled on napkins. He'd convinced himself that his success was entirely his own, conveniently forgetting who had financed his first property purchase, who had provided the legal expertise for his business deals, who had been the silent partner behind every major decision. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sole contract had been my masterpiece, a seemingly innocent document hidden within a stack of investment papers. Written in archaic legal language that referenced old maritime law and biblical precedents, it outlined the terms under which Marcus would forfeit not just his material possessions, but his very essence if he committed what the contract termed ultimate betrayal. Ultimate betrayal was defined very specifically: adultery resulting in pregnancy, combined with the violation of our marital home. The contract stated that such actions would constitute a willing surrender of his soul to me, along with all earthly possessions, future earnings, and personal autonomy. Marcus had signed it on our 3rd wedding anniversary, right after a romantic dinner where I'd presented it as part of our financial planning for the future. He'd been slightly drunk on the expensive wine I'd chosen specifically for the occasion, and completely focused on the clause that seemed to protect his real estate investments from any potential divorce proceedings. He never read the subsections. He never noticed the peculiar legal terminology. He never questioned why I insisted on having it notarized by 3 different witnesses, all of whom happened to be practitioners of very old, very powerful forms of contract magic. Through the security feed, I watched Jessica examining the framed photos on my nightstand, pictures of Marcus and me from our wedding, our various anniversaries, our trips to Europe. She picked up our wedding photo, studying my face with obvious disdain. "She's not even that pretty," she said, tossing the frame carelessly onto the bed. "I don't understand what you ever saw in her." Marcus shrugged, not even bothering to defend me. "She served her purpose. Helped me get established, build the business. But now I need someone who appreciates life, someone who can give me a family." The casual dismissal of 15 years of marriage, of my contributions to his success, of everything I'd sacrificed for his dreams, it was exactly what I'd been waiting for. The contract required not just the physical acts of betrayal, but a verbal renunciation of our marriage bond. His words, recorded in crystal-clear digital audio, had just sealed his fate. I reached for my phone and sent a text message to 3 different numbers. "It's time. Execute Phase 1. Within minutes, my secure email chimed with responses from my carefully assembled team. My private investigator confirmed that all surveillance equipment was functioning perfectly and all evidence was being backed up to multiple secure servers. My spiritual consultant verified that the lunar conditions were optimal for contract enforcement. My legal team confirmed that all preliminary paperwork had been filed and was standing by for immediate action. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of Marcus's education in the true meaning of consequences, but tonight, I would let him enjoy his victory. Let him and his pregnant mistress settle into my bedroom, make plans for their future in my house, dream about raising their child in the home I'd built. Let them believe they'd won. After all, the higher they climbed, the more spectacular their fall would be. I closed the surveillance feed and opened my laptop, pulling up the digital copies of every document Marcus had ever signed. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, property deeds, business partnerships, everything was there, waiting for tomorrow's revelation. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica's phone. "Thank you so much for being understanding about this situation. Marcus told me you're going to be moving out soon to give us space. I really appreciate how mature you're being about everything." The audacity was breathtaking. She was texting me from my own bedroom, thanking me for being understanding. About my husband moving his pregnant mistress into our home. I typed back, "Of course. I want what's best for everyone involved. We'll talk soon." Soon indeed. I poured myself a glass of the vintage wine Marcus had been saving for a special occasion. Apparently my humiliation hadn't qualified, and settled back in my leather chair. To review the final details of tomorrow's plan, the soul contract wasn't just a legal document, it was a binding supernatural agreement that required careful execution. The terms had been met: adultery, pregnancy, violation of the marital home, and verbal renunciation of our marriage bond. All that remained was the formal invocation of the contract's enforcement clause. At exactly 3:33 a.m., a time carefully chosen for its significance in various spiritual traditions, I would begin the ritual that would transfer ownership of Marcus's soul from him to me. By dawn, he would discover that his betrayal had cost him far more than just his marriage. My phone chimed again, this time with a message from my financial manager: "All accounts secured. Tomorrow's transfers are ready for execution on your command." I smiled, thinking about Marcus's shock when he discovered that every bank account, every investment, every piece of property he thought he owned had been systematically transferred into trusts and shell companies controlled entirely by me. The prenuptial agreement he'd been so proud of signing had actually granted me power of attorney over all his financial decisions in the event of adultery. He'd been so focused on protecting his assets from me that he'd failed to realize he was signing them over to me instead. The bedroom cameras showed Marcus and Jessica finally settling down for the night. She was curled against his chest, one hand resting on her pregnant belly, the other tracing circles on his chest. "I love you," she whispered. "I can't wait for our new life to begin." "Tomorrow," Marcus promised, kissing the top of her head. "Tomorrow, everything changes." He was more right than he knew. I finished my wine and began preparing for the 3:33 a.m. ritual. The contract enforcement required specific elements: candles made from beeswax and blessed with sacred oils, salt from the Dead Sea arranged in precise geometric patterns, and the Recitation of the binding words that would activate the soul transfer clause. Everything had to be perfect. After all, you only get one chance to claim a soul. The clock on my desk showed 3:15 a.m. In 18 minutes, Marcus would discover that betraying a contract lawyer specializing in supernatural agreements was the worst mistake of his life. I lit the first candle and began to arrange the salt circles, my movements precise and deliberate. Each grain had to be placed with intention, each word of the incantation spoken with absolute conviction. At 3:30, I heard Jessica cry out in the bedroom. Through the cameras, I could see her sitting up abruptly, her hand pressed to her belly, her face twisted in pain. "Marcus," she gasped. "Something's wrong." The baby, but Marcus was already changing. His eyes had gone completely black, and when he tried to speak, only incoherent sounds emerged. The soul transfer had begun 3 minutes early, triggered by the spiritual sensitivity of the unborn child. I smiled and continued my ritual. Sometimes the universe has its own timeline. By 3:33 a.m. exactly, it was done. Marcus's soul belonged to me, and with it, everything he'd ever owned, ever earned, or ever hoped to achieve. The real fun would begin at sunrise when he woke up to discover his new reality. But that would have to wait for tomorrow. Tonight, I had a celebration to plan. After all, I'd just become the owner of a very expensive real estate portfolio, a successful business empire, and one very attractive soul. Marcus had wanted to start a new life with his mistress. Soon, he'd learn that his old life, and everything in it, now belonged entirely to me. The contract was clear: ultimate betrayal meant ultimate surrender. And Marcus, in his arrogance and selfishness, had just surrendered everything. But this was only the beginning. The soul contract was just the first phase of my carefully orchestrated revenge. By the time I was finished, Marcus would understand that some betrayals carry consequences that extend far beyond the earthly realm. And Jessica? Sweet, naive Jessica, who thought she'd won the prize, she was about to learn that the man she'd fallen in love with no longer existed in any way that mattered. Tomorrow would bring revelations that would shake both their worlds to their very foundations. But tonight, I savored the moment of perfect victory, the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. The clock struck 4 a.m., marking the beginning of Marcus's first hour as my property. Time to prepare for the most entertaining day of my life. Dawn broke over Malibu with the kind of golden light that real estate photographers dream about, casting warm shadows across the marble floors of what was about to become a very different house. I had been awake for hours, reviewing final preparations while watching Marcus and Jessica sleep peacefully in my bed, completely unaware that their world had fundamentally shifted during the night. At exactly 7 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed First National Bank of California, right on schedule. "Good morning, Mrs. Cross," came the crisp voice of Helen Rodriguez, my personal banking representative. "I'm calling to confirm the completion of the overnight transfers you authorized. All funds from the joint accounts have been moved to your designated trusts, and the automatic payments for Mr. Morrison's business accounts have been suspended as requested." "Perfect," I replied, watching through the security feed as Marcus began to stir. "And the credit cards?" "Cancelled at midnight, ma'am. The letters of explanation will be delivered by courier within the hour." Through the bedroom camera, I saw Marcus reach for his phone, probably planning to check his morning emails. The confusion on his face when he saw 17 missed calls from various financial institutions was absolutely delicious. "There's one more thing, Mrs. Cross," Helen continued. "The mortgage company called. They wanted to confirm that you're exercising your right to accelerate the full payment on the Morrison Properties LLC portfolio. The total comes to $12.8 million, due in full by close of business today." Marcus had finally gotten Jessica awake, and I could see him frantically scrolling through his notifications. His real estate empire, built on leveraged properties and complex financing arrangements, was about to discover that every single loan had a clause allowing for immediate full payment demands, clauses I had insisted on when I co-signed for his business expansion 2 years ago. "Yes, Helen. Execute that immediately. And ensure that copies of all the acceleration notices are hand-delivered to his office by 9 a.m. Marcus was now pacing the bedroom, his phone pressed to his ear. Even without audio, I could read his lips. "What do you mean the account is frozen?" I ended the call with Helen and activated the intercom system that connected to the master bedroom. Time for the first direct communication of the new era. "Good morning, Marcus," my voice echoed through the bedroom speakers, causing both him and Jessica to jump. "I hope you slept well. We need to talk." Marcus spun around, looking for the source of my voice. "Evangeline? Where are you? What the hell is going on with our accounts?" "I'm in my study, reviewing some very interesting documents. Why don't you and your guest join me in the living room in 10 minutes? And Marcus?" I paused for effect. "You might want to put on something nice. We're expecting visitors." The security feed showed Jessica clutching Marcus's arm, her eyes wide with the first hints of fear. "Marcus, what's happening? Why is she being so calm about this?" Marcus was pulling on his clothes with sharp, angry movements. "She's playing games. Probably trying to get back at me before the divorce proceedings. Don't worry, baby. She can't touch my business, everything's protected by the prenup." "Oh, Marcus." Sweet, naive Marcus. I made my way to the living room, the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a perfect view of the Pacific Ocean. This room had always been my favorite space in the house, the neutral tones, the carefully curated art collection, the sense of calm authority it projected. Today, it would serve as the courtroom where Marcus would learn about the true meaning of consequences. I arranged myself in the ivory leather chair that faced the staircase, positioning the stack of documents on the glass coffee table with mathematical precision. The original Soul contract sat on top, its aged parchment and archaic symbols clearly visible to anyone who cared to look closely. Marcus descended the stairs first, his usual confident stride undermined by the way he kept checking his phone. Jessica followed behind him, one hand supporting her pregnant belly, the other gripping the banister as if she needed the stability. "Evangeline," Marcus began, his voice carrying the forced calm of a man trying to maintain control, "I know this situation is complicated. But we need to discuss this like adults. Jessica is pregnant, and we need to think about what's best for the baby." I smiled, gesturing for them to sit on the sofa across from me. "Oh, I agree completely. Let's definitely think about what's best. Please, sit." Jessica perched nervously on the edge of the cushion, her eyes darting around the room as if seeing it for the first time. She probably was. Marcus had always been careful to keep his affairs away from our home. Until last night, anyway. "First," I continued, picking up the top document from my stack, "let's address the immediate concern. Marcus, you've been trying to reach your bank this morning?" His jaw tightened. "You know I have. They're saying our accounts are frozen, that there's some kind of investigation." "What did you do?" "I exercised my legal rights under the agreements you signed." I held up a thick folder. "Specifically, the financial power of attorney clause in our prenuptial agreement. The one that activates in cases of adultery." Marcus's face went pale. That's not what that clause says. Isn't it?" I opened the folder and began reading. Section 7, subsection C, "In the event of confirmed adultery by either party, the injured spouse shall have immediate and exclusive control over all marital assets, business interests, and financial obligations for a period not to exceed the duration of legal proceedings." You signed this, Marcus. You had your lawyer review it. You insisted on it, actually, because you were worried about protecting your precious properties. Jessica was looking back and forth between us like a spectator at a tennis match. "Marcus, what is she talking about? You said the prenup protected your business." "It does protect his business," I agreed. "It protects it by placing it entirely under my control the moment he decided to betray our marriage." The doorbell rang, a melodious chime that echoed through the house. Through the front windows, I could see a fleet of black SUVs in the circular driveway. "Ah," I said, rising gracefully from my chair, "our first visitors have arrived." Marcus shot to his feet. "Who did you call?" "Evangeline, what are you doing?" "I'm ensuring that all legal procedures are followed correctly." I moved toward the front door, my heels clicking against the marble. After all, when one spouse moves his pregnant mistress into the marital home, there are protocols to observe. I opened the door to reveal Detective Sarah Chen from the LAPD's White-Collar Crime Division, along with 2 federal agents and a team of forensic accountants. Sarah and I had worked together on several high-profile cases over the years, she knew. The quality of evidence I provided was always impeccable. Dr. Cross, Sarah nodded professionally. We received your report about potential financial fraud and identity theft. We have warrants to examine all computer equipment and financial records related to Morrison Properties LLC. Behind me, I heard Marcus's sharp intake of breath. Financial fraud? Evangeline, what the hell are you talking about? I turned back to face him, my expression serene. Oh, didn't I mention? When I was reviewing our accounts last night, I discovered some very interesting discrepancies. Unauthorized transfers, forged signatures on loan documents, fictitious expenses claimed against properties that don't exist. The Federal Fraud Division is very interested in your creative accounting methods. The truth was, there was no actual fraud. Marcus was many things, but he wasn't a criminal in the traditional sense. However, the maze of shell companies and complex financial arrangements he'd created to maximize his tax benefits looked suspiciously like money laundering to the untrained eye. It would take the investigators weeks to untangle the legitimate transactions from the merely creative ones, weeks during which all his assets would remain frozen. This is insane, Marcus turned to the detective. She's my wife, she's doing this because she's angry about the affair. None of this is real. Detective Chen consulted her tablet. Sir, we have documented evidence of financial irregularities spanning the past 3 years. Bank records showing suspicious transfer patterns, property transactions with questionable documentation, and what appears to be systematic tax evasion through offshore accounts. I had spent months preparing this evidence package, carefully highlighting every gray area in Marcus's business dealings, every questionable decision that could be interpreted as potential fraud. Marcus had always sailed close to the wind with his business practices. I'd simply provided law enforcement with a detailed map of exactly how close. The offshore accounts, I added helpfully, were particularly concerning. 7 different shell companies in the Cayman Islands, all receiving regular payments from Morrison Properties. I'm sure there's a perfectly innocent explanation, but the timing of these transfers, right after Marcus informed me he wanted a divorce, well, it suggests an attempt to hide assets from the marital estate. Jessica was now visibly shaking. Marcus, you didn't tell me about any offshore accounts. Marcus whirled on her. Because there's nothing to tell. These are legitimate business expenses. He stopped abruptly, realizing that every word was being recorded by the federal agents. Detective Chen stepped forward. Mr. Morrison, you have the right to remain silent. Given the nature of these allegations, we'll need you to come with us for questioning. He's not going anywhere, I interjected smoothly. Officer Chen, I believe Mr. Morrison is willing to cooperate fully with your investigation. Aren't you, Marcus? The federal agents were already moving through the house with their equipment, photographing documents and seizing computer hard drives. I watched Marcus's face as he realized the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about frozen bank accounts or complicated divorces. His entire business empire was being dissected by federal investigators. However, I continued, there is one small complication. Jessica, dear, you might want to sit down for this part. She had gone completely white, one hand pressed to her belly as if protecting her unborn child from whatever was coming next. I picked up another document from my stack, this one bearing the official seal of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. It seems there's been an issue with your visa status, Jessica. According to ICE, your student visa expired 8 months ago, which means you've been in the country illegally. They'll be here within the hour to discuss your situation. Jessica's legs gave out, and she collapsed back onto the sofa. That's impossible. My visa doesn't expire until next year. Actually, I said, consulting the paperwork, your visa was tied to your enrollment at UCLA. When you dropped out last semester to focus on your Instagram career, your legal status changed immediately. The university was required to report the change to Immigration Services, but somehow that paperwork got delayed. Until yesterday, when I helpfully provided them with updated information about your current circumstances. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. You can't do this. To her. She's pregnant. I'm not doing anything to her, Marcus. I'm simply ensuring that all relevant authorities are aware of the various legal issues that need to be addressed. I turned to Jessica with what I hoped looked like genuine sympathy. I'm sure ICE will be very understanding about your situation. Pregnant women in deportation proceedings are often granted special consideration. Deportation? Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. Well, that depends on several factors. Your cooperation with the financial investigation, for instance. Whether you've been receiving unreported income from your social media activities. Whether you've been living as a dependent of someone under federal investigation for financial crimes. I paused, letting the implications sink in. It's really quite complex. The federal agents had finished their preliminary sweep and were now setting up equipment in Marcus's home office. Detective Chen approached with a warrant in her hand. Dr. Cross, we'll need to seal off Mr. Morrison's office and any other areas where business records might be stored. The investigation will likely take several weeks. Of course, I replied. Marcus, you'll need to find alternative accommodations while the house is part of an active investigation. I'm sure your mother would be happy to have you stay with her. Marcus's face had progressed through several stages of shock and was now settling into a kind of numb disbelief. This is my house, Evangeline. You can't kick me out of my own house. I reached for the final document in my stack, the property deed that Marcus had never bothered to examine closely. Actually, this is my house. Always has been. The deed is in my name exclusively, has been since we bought it. You were so focused on protecting your business assets that you never noticed I was protecting my personal ones. I handed him the deed, watching as his eyes scanned the legal language that clearly established my sole ownership of the property. The mortgage payments came from our joint account, yes, but the title, the insurance, the property taxes, all in my name. All my responsibility. All my asset. Jessica was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face as the reality of her situation began to penetrate. Her fairy tale romance with the successful real estate mogul was rapidly transforming into a nightmare of federal investigations and deportation proceedings. I don't understand, she sobbed. Marcus, you said everything would be fine. You said we'd be together, that we'd raise the baby in this beautiful house. Marcus sank into a chair, his phone forgotten in his hand. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked truly defeated. Evangeline, please. I know I hurt you, I know I made mistakes, but this is going too far. Jessica doesn't deserve this. You're right, I agreed. She doesn't deserve this. She's just a young woman who fell for the lies of a married man. But Marcus, actions have consequences. You chose to move your pregnant mistress into our bedroom. You chose to disrespect our marriage and our home. You chose to believe that there would be no price to pay for your betrayal. I moved to the window, looking out at the federal vehicles in my driveway. But here's what you never understood about me, Marcus. I don't just practice law, I believe in it. I believe in contracts. And consequences, in agreements and accountability. And most importantly, I believe that people should get exactly what they've earned. Detective Chen was approaching with a set of handcuffs. Mr. Morrison, we're going to need you to come with us now. The questioning will be formal, and you'll want to contact an attorney. Wait, Marcus stood up, his hands raised. Evangeline, what do you want? Name your price. What will it take to make this stop? I turned back to face him, my expression calm and controlled. Oh, Marcus. You still don't understand. This isn't about what I want. This is about what you owe. I picked up the sole contract from the coffee table, its ancient parchment catching the morning light. You see, this isn't just about adultery or divorce or even financial fraud. This is about a debt that came due at 3:33 this morning, when you fulfilled the exact conditions outlined in a very special agreement you signed on our third wedding anniversary. Marcus stared at the document, his face reflecting his growing confusion. What is that? Your signature, I replied simply. On a contract that specifically outlined the consequences of ultimate betrayal. Adultery resulting in pregnancy, combined with violation of our marital home, combined with verbal renunciation of our marriage bond. I smiled. You accomplished all three last night. Jessica had stopped crying and was now staring at the parchment with wide, frightened eyes. What kind of contract is that? It looks old. Very old, I confirmed. Based on precedents from maritime law, biblical covenant tradition, and certain, older forms of jurisprudence. The kind of contract that transfers ownership not just of material possessions, but of something far more fundamental. Detective Chen cleared her throat. Dr. Cross, we really do need to proceed with the arrest. Of course, I nodded. Marcus, you should go with them. Answer their questions honestly, it will go better for you in the long run. And don't worry about Jessica. I'll make sure she's taken care of. As the handcuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists, he looked back at me with something approaching terror in his eyes. Evangeline, what have you done? I've simply collected on a debt, I replied. The terms were very clear, Marcus. You just never bothered to read them. The federal agents led him toward the door, their official procedures a stark contrast to the supernatural implications of what had really occurred. Marcus kept looking back, as if trying to understand how his perfect plan had transformed so completely into his worst nightmare. Jessica remained on the sofa, her hands cradling her pregnant belly, tears still flowing down her cheeks. When the house was finally quiet again, she looked up at me with desperate eyes. What happens to me now? I considered her question, studying the young woman who had so eagerly participated in the destruction of my marriage. She was beautiful. I had to admit, with the kind of effortless youth that Marcus had found so irresistible. But beauty without wisdom was a dangerous combination. That depends entirely on you, Jessica. You have some very important decisions to make in the coming hours. I settled back into my chair, my voice taking on the tone I used with particularly difficult clients. The immigration officers will be here soon, and they're going to ask you a lot of questions about your relationship with Marcus, about money you may have received, about your living arrangements. I never received any money, she protested. Marcus paid for things, but I never asked him for cash. The expensive jewelry? The designer clothes? The luxury vacation to Bali last month? I consulted my notes. The IRS considers gifts over a certain value to be taxable income. Income that should have been reported. Income that someone in your visa situation definitely shouldn't have been receiving. Her face crumpled. I didn't know. Marcus handled everything. He said not to worry about the details. And that's exactly what I'm counting on, I said softly. Your cooperation could be very valuable to the federal investigation. Marcus made a lot of financial decisions over the past year, and you were present for many of them. Your testimony could help untangle his creative accounting methods. Jessica wiped her eyes, a spark of understanding beginning to show. You want me to testify against him? I want you to tell the truth, I corrected. About the offshore accounts he mentioned. About the cash payments he made to various contractors. About the business meetings held in hotel rooms that you attended. She was quiet for a long moment, her hands moving protectively over her belly. When she looked up again, there was a new hardness in her eyes, the first sign that she was beginning to understand the game we were really playing. And if I cooperate? What happens to my immigration status? I smiled, pleased that she was finally asking the right questions. Witnesses in federal investigations often receive special consideration. Temporary visas, protective status, sometimes even paths to permanent residency. I paused. Especially witnesses who are pregnant and can demonstrate that they were victims of manipulation rather than willing participants in criminal activity. But the baby, she whispered. Marcus's baby. Will be an American citizen, I finished. Born on American soil to a mother who helped expose financial crimes. The kind of story that immigration judges find very sympathetic. Jessica closed her eyes, and I could practically see the calculations running through her mind. Stay loyal to Marcus and face deportation to a country she hadn't seen in 3 years, leaving her child to grow up without her. Or cooperate with the investigation and potentially secure both her future and her baby's. He never loved me, did he? She asked. Quietly. This was all just about power for him. Proving he could take whatever he wanted. Marcus loves the idea of Marcus, I replied. Everything else is just decoration. The sound of vehicles in the driveway announced the arrival of the immigration officers. Jessica's moment of decision had arrived. What do I tell them? She asked. Her voice steady now, resolved. You tell them the truth, I said, standing to answer the door. All of it. As I walked toward the entrance, I reflected on how perfectly the morning had unfolded. Marcus was in federal custody, his business empire under investigation, his assets frozen. Jessica was about to become a cooperative witness whose testimony would ensure his legal troubles extended for years, but the sole contract was still the foundation of everything else. Without it, this would just be a particularly nasty divorce. Combined with a white-collar investigation. With it, Marcus's betrayal had triggered consequences that would follow him far beyond any earthly court. The real entertainment was just beginning. Phase 2 would start this afternoon, when Marcus discovered that his legal troubles were the least of his problems. After all, when you own someone's soul, you own their destiny. And I had some very creative plans for Marcus's future. The immigration officers had taken Jessica away 3 hours ago, her cooperation secured with promises of witness protection and a path to legal residency. Watching her walk out of my house, had been almost anticlimactic after the morning's earlier drama. She'd chosen survival over loyalty, exactly as I'd predicted. Now the house was finally quiet, filled only with the hum of federal agents cataloging Marcus's business records in his sealed office. I poured myself a cup of Earl Grey tea and settled into my study to review the surveillance footage from the past 6 months. Time to document the full scope of Marcus's betrayal for the divorce proceedings that would inevitably follow. What I discovered made my blood run cold. The affair with Jessica hadn't been his first. Or his second. Or even his fifth. I sat transfixed as months of recorded conversations, captured by the security system Marcus had never known existed, painted a picture of systematic infidelity stretching back 3 years. Phone calls with women whose names I didn't recognize. Hotel reservations made with company credit cards. Business trips that were anything but business. Sarah, baby, I miss you, Marcus's voice echoed from speakers, recorded just 2 months ago. I know I said I'd leave Evangeline after the Thompson deal closed, but it's complicated. She's got her claws in deeper than I thought. Sarah. I pulled up the employee records for Morrison Properties LLC, cross-referencing with the phone number from Marcus's call logs. Sarah Martinez, 26 years old, hired as Marcus's personal assistant 8 months ago. According to her employment file, she'd been receiving bonuses that seemed excessive for administrative work. The recordings continued. Another voice, this one from 4 months ago. Marcus, you promised me that condo in Miami. My lease is up next week, and if you don't come through, I'm going to have to tell your wife everything. I traced that number to Amanda Wilson, a real estate agent Marcus had been working with on his Florida expansion. The promised condo appeared in his business records as a temporary corporate housing investment. Amanda's signature was on dozens of property documents, always with notations about private consultations and after-hours meetings. But it was the third voice that made my hands shake with rage. I can't keep doing this, Marcus. Your wife called the office yesterday asking about the Henderson account. She's getting suspicious, and I can't afford to lose my license over this. Rebecca Chen, my former law school classmate. My supposed friend who had been handling Marcus's corporate legal work for the past 2 years. The woman I'd recommended when Marcus needed someone to structure his offshore investments. Rebecca had been feeding Marcus legal advice on how to hide assets from me while simultaneously sharing his bed and taking his money. Every strategy session had been both professional consultation and personal betrayal. I opened a new file on my computer and began cataloging the evidence. 6 different women over 3 years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in gifts, trips, and consulting fees. A systematic pattern of using company resources to fund his extramarital adventures. But the recordings revealed something even more disturbing. The sole contract thing is genius, babe. Rebecca's voice came through clearly on a conversation from 6 months ago. Your wife actually thinks she's trapped you with some kind of supernatural legal document. I've never seen anything so ridiculous. Maritime law? Biblical precedents? It's like she's playing dress up as a witch. Marcus's laughter followed. She spent weeks researching that thing, getting it notarized by all those weird spiritual consultants. I just let her think it was binding while I signed the real protection documents with you. She has no idea that every asset is already sheltered in trust she can't touch. My blood turned to ice. They'd been planning this for months, using Rebecca's legal expertise to circumvent every protection I'd tried to put in place. While I'd been crafting what I believed was an ironclad supernatural contract, they'd been systematically dismantling my financial security. What happens when she figures it out? Rebecca had asked. She won't, Marcus replied confidently. Evangeline's brilliant with corporate law, but she's completely naive about people. She actually believes I love her. By the time she realizes what's happening, Jessica will have had the baby, will have gotten the kid American citizenship. And I'll be ready to disappear with enough money to start over somewhere with no extradition treaties. The conversation continued, revealing layers of deception that went far beyond simple adultery. Marcus had been planning to frame me for his own financial crimes, using forged documents that bore my signature to make it appear that I'd been the one manipulating offshore accounts. Rebecca had been crafting a legal strategy that would leave me facing criminal charges while Marcus disappeared with his illegally hidden assets. Jessica hadn't been his endgame, she'd been his insurance policy. A pregnant American girlfriend. Would provide him with an anchor baby and sympathy from immigration courts if he needed to claim refugee status somewhere. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling from the implications. The soul contract I'd been so proud of, the supernatural protections I'd thought were impregnable, the careful legal framework I'd constructed, all of it had been useless against their counter-strategy, except for one small detail. They hadn't considered. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in over a decade. Madame Zelda's occult consultancy, came the gravelly voice of my former mentor. We're closed. It's Evangeline Cross, madam. I need an emergency consultation. There was a long pause. Little Evie? My star pupil? I haven't heard from you since you abandoned the true path for that corporate nonsense. Madame Zelda had been my guide when I first discovered my affinity for supernatural jurisprudence. During law school, she taught me that some contracts transcended the physical realm, that certain agreements could bind souls as well as estates. But I'd gradually moved away from her teachings as my career in conventional law had flourished. I need to know about soul contract enforcement when the subject has been practicing counter-magic, I said without preamble. Another pause, longer this time. Someone's been interfering with your binding work? That's very dangerous, little Evie. Very dangerous indeed. My husband signed a soul contract 3 years ago, but I've discovered he's been working with someone who understands supernatural law. They've been actively trying to break the binding. Impossible, Madame Zelda's voice sharpened. A properly executed soul contract can't be broken by counter-magic. It can only be. She trailed off, and I heard the sound of pages rustling. Oh, this is very bad. What is it? The binding can be reversed if the subject demonstrates that they entered the contract under false pretenses. If they can prove that the magical practitioner, that's you, dear, was operating in bad faith, then the contract becomes null and the magical debt transfers to the practitioner instead. My blood went cold. What constitutes false pretenses? If the practitioner was already aware of the subject's infidelity at the time of signing, and failed to disclose that knowledge, then the contract is considered fraudulent. The soul binding reverses, and the practitioner becomes bound to the subject. Instead of the other way around. I closed my eyes, remembering the private investigator's reports I'd received 2 weeks before our 3rd anniversary. I'd known about Marcus's first affair, with Amanda Wilson, when I'd presented him with the soul contract. I'd told myself. It didn't matter, that the contract would prevent future betrayals, but according to supernatural law, my knowledge of his existing infidelity had invalidated the entire agreement. Madam, if the contract is fraudulent, what exactly happens to the practitioner? The soul binding reverses completely. Everything you intended for him, the transfer of assets, the supernatural ownership, the karmic consequences, all of that, becomes his to claim from you instead. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Little Evie, if someone has been teaching him counter-magic, he could already be in the process of claiming your soul. The phone slipped from my hand as the implications hit me. Every move I'd made against Marcus, the frozen accounts, the federal investigation, the immigration charges against Jessica, all of it could be turned against me if the soul contract binding had already reversed. I ran to my laptop and pulled up the offshore banking records I'd used to trigger the federal investigation. If the soul contract had reversed, then technically Marcus now owned everything I'd been trying to protect. The evidence I'd provided to law enforcement could be reframed as me stealing from accounts that legally belonged to him. My phone rang, startling me from my panicked research. The caller ID showed Rebecca Chen's number. Hello, Evangeline, Rebecca's voice was silk over steel. I think it's time we had a proper conversation. Rebecca. I fought to keep my voice steady. I suppose you've been busy this morning. Oh, very busy. Did you enjoy the little show with the federal agents? We particularly enjoyed watching you explain to Jessica about her immigration status. Such a thorough performance. We, Marcus and I, of course. Did you really think he was going to stay in federal custody? The charges you filed were based on evidence from accounts that legally belong to him now. Falsely reporting financial crimes is a felony, Evangeline. The FBI is very interested in speaking with you about your creative interpretation of banking records. I could hear Marcus's laughter in the background. Tell her about the soul contract, he called out. Ah yes, your masterpiece, Rebecca continued. Marcus has been practicing countermagic for months, ever since I explained to him what you'd really done. The binding reversed 3 weeks ago, during the new moon. Everything you thought you owned? It's his now. Everything you thought was protected? He can claim it. Everything you thought was your power? It belongs to him. The room was spinning around me. That's impossible. The contract was properly executed, under false pretenses, Rebecca interrupted. You knew about Amanda when you had Marcus sign the contract. That knowledge invalidated the entire agreement and reversed the binding. Didn't your precious spiritual consultants explain the rules to you properly? They hadn't. Or rather, I hadn't asked the right questions. I'd been so focused on creating an unbreakable supernatural contract that I'd never considered what would happen if I broke the rules myself. But there's more, Rebecca continued cheerfully. Since the soul binding has reversed, Marcus is now entitled to claim everything you intended to take from him. Your house, your bank accounts, your law practice, your reputation, all of it transfers to him as compensation for your attempted spiritual theft. The house is in my name, was in your name. The deed transferred automatically when the binding reversed. Marcus is actually being quite generous by letting you stay there during this transition period. I looked around my study, at the law books and awards and certificates that represented 15 years of building my career. All of it was now legally Marcus's property, held in trust by supernatural forces I'd tried to manipulate and failed to understand. What do you want? I whispered. What we've always wanted. For you to disappear quietly while we get on with our lives. Sign the papers I'm having delivered to you, transfer your remaining assets to the proper accounts, and we might be persuaded not to pursue criminal charges for the false FBI reports. And if I refuse? Then you'll discover exactly what it feels like to lose everything you've ever worked for, just like you tried to do to Marcus. The difference is, we actually understand the supernatural law we're working with. The call ended, leaving me alone in a house that was no longer mine, surrounded by evidence of crimes I'd committed against a man who now owned my soul. My laptop chimed with an incoming email. The subject line read, Transfer documents, signature. Required immediately. I opened the attachment to find a comprehensive asset transfer agreement that would sign over my law practice, my savings accounts, my investment portfolio, and my personal property to Marcus Morrison. At the bottom of the document was a clause releasing him from all marital obligations and acknowledging my acceptance of the reversed soul contract binding. A second email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. Evangeline, the FBI would like to schedule an interview regarding your report of financial crimes against Morrison Properties LLC. Based on new evidence provided by Mr. Morrison's legal counsel, there are questions about the accuracy of your claims. Please contact Agent Williams immediately to arrange a meeting. Failure to respond within 24 hours will result in a warrant for your arrest. I stared at the screen, watching my entire world collapse with surgical precision. Marcus and Rebecca had played a longer game than I'd ever imagined, using my own expertise against me and turning my supernatural protections into the instruments of my destruction. But as I sat there in the ruins of my carefully planned revenge, one thought began to crystallize in my mind that they'd made one crucial mistake. Rebecca was right that the soul contract had reversed, transferring ownership of my soul and assets to Marcus. But she'd overlooked a critical detail in supernatural law, something even Madame Zelda might not have remembered. When a soul contract reverses due to fraud, the original practitioner becomes bound to the subject. But if the subject then commits a greater betrayal while holding that binding, the contract snaps back with doubled force, and Marcus, in his arrogance, was about to commit the greatest betrayal of all. I reached for my phone and dialed Jessica's number. If she was in federal custody as a cooperating witness, she'd have access to protected communications. Jessica? It's Evangeline. I need to tell you something very important about Marcus and the baby you're carrying. I can't talk to you. Jessica's voice was strained. My lawyer said. Jessica, listen to me carefully. Marcus never intended to leave me for you. You were never his endgame. You were his exit strategy. There was silence on the other end of the line. Check the DNA results from your prenatal testing, I continued. The ones Marcus insisted you keep private. The ones he said were just routine but made you sign a waiver allowing him access to the results. How do you know about? Because Rebecca Chen has been his lawyer for 2 years, and she's been documenting everything. Jessica, that baby you're carrying? It's not Marcus's. The silence stretched longer this time. The timing doesn't work, I pressed on. You've been dating Marcus for 8 months, but your pregnancy is at 32 weeks. Do the math, Jessica. He's been using you to claim paternity of another man's child. That's impossible, she whispered, but I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. Ask yourself why he was so eager to move you into our bedroom last night. Why he insisted on establishing residency and cohabitation documentation. Why he needed proof that he was supporting you and the baby as a family unit. I could hear her crying softly. He said it was because he loved us. He needed to establish legal paternity for immigration purposes. A pregnant girlfriend with questionable visa status and a baby that might not be his, that's not a liability, Jessica. That's leverage. He was planning to use your baby as collateral for his escape plan. The revelation would destroy Marcus's carefully constructed narrative. More importantly, it would constitute the ultimate betrayal, using an innocent child as a pawn in his schemes, which would trigger the soul contract's snapback clause with exponential force, but that was only the beginning of what I had planned. For Marcus Morrison, after all, when someone steals your soul through fraud, the only appropriate response is to take theirs through justice, and I was just getting started. Jessica's silence stretched for nearly a full minute before she spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. The DNA test? Marcus said it was just routine. That all pregnant women get them now. He made me sign papers saying he could access the results for insurance purposes. And you never saw those results yourself? He said everything was fine, that the baby was healthy. He seemed so happy about it. Her voice cracked. Evangeline, if what you're saying is true, Jessica, I need you to request those DNA results. From your doctor. Today. And I need you to think very carefully about the timeline of your relationship with Marcus versus when you would have conceived. Through the phone, I could hear her sharp intake of breath as the mathematics of her situation became clear. If she was 32 weeks pregnant and had only known Marcus for 8 months, the conception had occurred before they'd even met. There was someone else, she admitted quietly. Before Marcus. Diego, my ex-boyfriend from college. We broke up right around the time I met Marcus at that seminar. But Marcus said, he calculated the dates himself and said the baby was definitely his. Of course he had. Marcus had always been excellent with numbers when it served his purposes. Jessica, listen to me very carefully. You're in federal protective custody right now, which means you have certain rights and protections. Use them. Demand to speak with your lawyer and request immediate DNA verification. If that baby isn't Marcus's, then his entire narrative about supporting his pregnant girlfriend falls apart. But what about my immigration status? If I'm not carrying an American citizen's baby? You're a witness in a federal investigation, I reminded her. That protection doesn't depend on your relationship with Marcus. In fact, if he's been lying about paternity to manipulate both you and the legal system, that becomes part of his criminal conspiracy. After ending the call with Jessica, I sat in my study, my former study, contemplating the pieces of the puzzle that were finally falling into place. Marcus's eagerness to establish paternity, his insistence on moving Jessica into our bedroom for documentation purposes, his careful timing of everything to coincide with her approaching due date, it all made sense if he'd known from the beginning that the child wasn't his, but why would he want to claim someone else's baby? The answer came to me as I reviewed the offshore banking records one more time. Marcus hadn't been hiding money from me, he'd been stealing it from his clients. The complex web of accounts and shell companies wasn't designed to protect his assets from divorce proceedings. It was designed to funnel his clients' investment funds into his personal accounts while maintaining the appearance of legitimate business operations. He'd been running a Ponzi scheme, using new investors' money to pay returns to existing clients, while siphoning millions into accounts only he could access. The scheme was sophisticated enough to avoid detection for years, but it would eventually collapse when too many investors tried to withdraw their funds simultaneously. That's where Jessica and the baby came in. A man fleeing federal fraud charges might be extradited from almost anywhere in the world. But a man claiming to be the father of an American citizen, especially one involved with a pregnant woman facing immigration challenges, could tie up extradition proceedings for years. While appealing on humanitarian grounds, Marcus had been planning his exit strategy long before he'd ever met Jessica. He'd just been waiting for the right pregnant girlfriend to complete his cover story. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The transfer documents are on your doorstep. You have until 6 p.m. to sign them, or the FBI visit becomes an arrest warrant. Choose wisely. Rebecca was pushing hard for a quick resolution, which meant their timeline was tighter than they wanted me to believe. If Marcus really controlled the reversed soul contract, why the rush? Why not savor their victory and take their time dismantling my life piece by piece? The answer was simple: the soul contract reversal wasn't as stable as Rebecca had claimed. Supernatural bindings were notoriously volatile, especially when they'd been manipulated through countermagic. They needed my signature on conventional legal documents to lock in their gains before the magical binding could shift again. I walked to the front door and found a thick manila envelope marked "Urgent, immediate signature required." Inside were asset transfer documents, resignation papers for my law practice, and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from ever discussing the supernatural aspects of our marriage. But it was the final document that revealed the true scope of their scheme: a confession letter, already written in my name, admitting to falsifying evidence against Marcus and acknowledging that I'd been the one embezzling from his business accounts. All it needed was my signature to become a legally binding admission of guilt. They weren't just trying to steal my assets, they were trying to frame me for Marcus's crimes and ensure I took the fall for his Ponzi scheme while he disappeared with his stolen millions. I was reading the confession letter when my phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Madame Zelda's number. "Little Evie, we have a problem," she said without preamble. "I've been researching your situation, and I need to see that soul contract immediately. There are things about binding reversals that I didn't mention earlier." "What kind of things?" "The kind that could get you killed if we don't handle them properly. Someone has been feeding your husband very dangerous information about supernatural law. Countermagic isn't just about reversing bindings, it's about consuming the magical essence of the original practitioner." My blood chilled. "What does that mean?" "It means that every day the reversed binding remains in place, you're getting weaker while he's getting stronger. Eventually, he'll absorb enough of your spiritual energy to make the transfer permanent. After that," she paused. "After that, there won't be enough of your soul left to reverse anything." "How long do I have?" "Based on what you've told me about the timeline, probably 72 hours before the process becomes irreversible. Maybe less if he's been actively drawing on your energy." I thought about the exhaustion I'd been feeling lately, the way my usual sharp mental focus had seemed slightly clouded. I'd attributed it to stress from discovering Marcus's affair, but apparently it had been something far more sinister. "Madam, what happens if I can prove that Marcus committed a greater betrayal after the binding reversed?" "You mentioned something about snapback effects." "The contract would reverse again, yes, but with exponential force. Instead of just reclaiming your original binding, you'd gain control over everything he'd absorbed from you, plus his own spiritual essence. It would be devastating for him." "Devastating how?" "Complete soul binding. Not just ownership of assets or control over decisions, but absolute dominion over his spiritual existence. He would become, for lack of a better term, your supernatural slave." The possibilities were intriguing, but first I needed to prove that Marcus had committed the greater betrayal. Jessica's DNA results would be a good start, but I needed more evidence of his systematic deception. I called my private investigator, hoping Marcus hadn't thought to cut off my access to professional contacts yet. "David Chen," came the familiar voice. "I was wondering when you'd call. Things have gotten very interesting in the Morrison case." You've been monitoring the situation? Mrs. Cross, I've been monitoring your husband for 6 months. Did you really think his sudden cooperation with federal agents was coincidental? I paused, processing the implications. You've been feeding information to the FBI? Your husband has been running a $50 million investment fraud for the past 3 years. I documented everything: the false client statements, the fabricated investment returns, the systematic theft of pension funds from elderly investors. The Bureau has been building a case against him for months. Then why haven't they arrested him yet? Because they wanted to see how far the conspiracy extended. Your husband isn't the only one involved in this scheme, Mrs. Cross. Rebecca Chen has been providing legal cover for multiple investment frauds across the state. They're part of a much larger network. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Marcus's affair with Rebecca hadn't been about love or even lust, it had been about crime. She'd been providing legal expertise for his fraud scheme while helping him hide the evidence through their offshore accounts and shell companies. David, I need you to find out everything you can about Jessica Martinez's pregnancy. Medical records, DNA tests, anything that can establish paternity or lack thereof. Already on it. Her doctor was very cooperative when I explained that the FBI was investigating identity fraud related to false paternity claims. The DNA results should be available within the hour. And Marcus's current location? He's at the Beverly Hills Hotel with Rebecca Chen. They think they're celebrating their victory, but they're actually making it very easy for federal surveillance to document their conspiracy. I smiled for the first time in days. David, how long would it take you to get me audio recordings from their hotel room? I can't illegally record private conversations, Mrs. Cross. What if the hotel room was registered using company credit cards that I have legal authority to monitor as part of an ongoing federal investigation? There was a pause. Well, in that case, business communications might be considered fair game. Give me 30 minutes. While David worked on obtaining the hotel recordings, I focused on the sole contract documents. If Madame Zelda was right about the 72-hour window, I needed to understand exactly what constituted a greater betrayal in supernatural law. That I pulled out my collection of ancient legal texts, focusing on the volumes that dealt with spiritual contracts and binding reversals. The answer, when I found it, was both simple and devastating. According to precedent established in 16th-century maritime courts that had dealt with supernatural contracts, a greater betrayal was defined as the willing sacrifice of an innocent soul for material gain. In practical terms, that meant using someone else's spiritual essence, their life force, their future, their very identity, as currency in supernatural dealings. If Marcus was indeed planning to claim paternity of Jessica's child and use that claim to shield himself from prosecution while abandoning both mother and baby once he'd fled the country, that would constitute the willing sacrifice of 2 innocent souls, Jessica's and her unborn child's. But I needed proof of his intent, not just suspicion. My phone chimed with a message from David, audio attached. You're going to want to hear this. I downloaded the file and pressed play, hearing Marcus's voice with crystal clarity through the expensive hotel room speakers. Rebecca, I need to know that you understand the timeline here. Once Jessica has the baby, we have maybe 48 hours to establish the paternity documentation and get the citizenship paperwork filed before anyone starts asking inconvenient questions. Rebecca's voice was equally clear. The forged DNA results are already prepared. As soon as she delivers, we submit the false paternity claim, establish you as the father on the birth certificate, and file for emergency citizenship documentation. And then? Then you disappear. The baby's American citizenship gives you legal grounds to fight extradition for years, especially with a new mother making tearful pleas about keeping families together. By the time anyone figures out the baby isn't yours, you'll be safely established in a non-extradition country with your $50 million. What about Jessica? Rebecca's laugh was cold. Jessica serves her purpose by having the baby. After that, she becomes a liability. Her immigration status is precarious enough that one anonymous tip about her lying to federal investigators will get her deported. The baby stays here with documented American citizenship. You claim parental rights from wherever you end up, and the whole thing becomes an international custody dispute that will tie up courts for a decade. And Evangeline? Evangeline signs the confession papers tonight, takes responsibility for your crimes, and spends the next 20 years in federal prison. By the time she gets out, if she gets out, you'll be untouchable. The recording continued for another 10 minutes, documenting in excruciating detail their plan to destroy 3 lives, mine, Jessica's, and her unborn child's, all to facilitate Marcus's escape from justice. It was exactly the evidence I needed to trigger the soul contract snapback clause. I reached for my phone and dialed Madame Zelda's number. I have proof of the greater betrayal, I said without preamble. What do I need to do to invoke the snapback clause? Are you certain, little Evie? Once you trigger a snapback binding with exponential force, there's no reversing it. Your husband's soul will be permanently bound to yours. Forever. I thought about Jessica, alone and pregnant in federal custody, believing she was carrying the child of a man who loved her. I thought about the elderly investors whose life savings Marcus had stolen to fund his lavish lifestyle. I thought about the systematic way he'd planned to destroy everyone who had ever trusted him. I'm certain. Then we begin immediately. The ritual must be completed before midnight, or the 72-hour window closes and the reversal becomes permanent. Gather the following items. As Madame Zelda listed the components I would need for the snapback ritual, I felt a familiar surge of purpose flowing through me. Marcus had been right about one thing: I was brilliant with contracts, supernatural or otherwise, but he'd underestimated the most important aspect of my expertise. I always read the fine print, especially the clauses about what happened when someone tried to break an unbreakable agreement. By midnight, Marcus would discover that some debts can never be escaped, and some contracts are written in forces more binding than ink and paper. The real question wasn't whether I could reclaim my soul, it was what I intended to do with his once I owned it completely. After all, when someone tries to sacrifice your life for their freedom, the only appropriate response is to ensure they never have the opportunity to make that choice again. Forever is a very long time to regret betraying the wrong woman. The components for the snapback ritual were surprisingly mundane: black candles blessed with graveyard dirt, salt from tears shed in betrayal, a silver blade that had never drawn blood, and most importantly, the original soul contract written in Marcus's own hand. The power wasn't in the mystical ingredients, it was in the intent behind their use and the violation of cosmic justice that demanded correction. I had 6 hours until midnight. Marcus and Rebecca, still celebrating at their hotel, had no idea that their recorded confessions had just sealed their supernatural fate. The ritual space must be prepared in the location of the original betrayal, Madame Zelda had explained during our frantic phone consultation, where the first violation occurred that justified the contract's existence. Our bedroom. Of course it would be our bedroom, where Marcus had brought Jessica less than 24 hours ago, where he'd proclaimed his love for another woman in the bed I'd bought with my inheritance, where he'd planned the destruction of our marriage while lying next to me for months. I climbed the stairs to the master suite, my arms full of ritual components. The federal agents had finished their evidence collection hours ago, leaving behind only the lingering scent of their presence and the subtle disarray of a thorough search. The room felt different now, violated and somehow smaller, as if Marcus's betrayal had physically altered the space. The bed where he'd brought his pregnant mistress was still unmade, the sheets tangled and stained with the evidence of their coupling. I stripped everything away methodically, down to the bare mattress, then began arranging the ritual circle according to Madame Zelda's precise instructions. The salt went first, poured in a perfect circle around the bed's perimeter. Each grain had to be placed with intention, and as I walked the circle, I recited the names of everyone Marcus had betrayed: Jessica, the elderly investors whose pensions he'd stolen, Rebecca's other clients who'd trusted her legal advice, and myself. With each name, the salt seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. The black candles came next, positioned at the cardinal points around the circle. North for earth and stability, south for fire and purification, east for air and truth, west for water and emotional healing. As I lit each candle, I spoke the words of binding that Madame Zelda had taught me. By earth, I ground this intention in reality. By fire, I purify this space of deception. By air, I speak truth into existence. By water, I wash away the poison of betrayal. The silver blade, ornate and ancient, went on the nightstand where Marcus had placed his wedding ring each night, the ring that now seemed like just another prop in his elaborate deception. The blade would be used not to draw blood, but to cut the spiritual cords that bound the reversed contract to his will. Finally, I placed the original soul contract in the center of the bed, its parchment pages spread wide to display Marcus's confident signature. The signature he'd made while drunk on expensive wine, and the certainty that he was protecting himself from a wife he thought was naive about the true nature of power. My phone buzzed with updates from David, my private investigator. Jessica had received her DNA results and was currently in an emergency meeting with federal prosecutors. The baby she was carrying belonged to her ex-boyfriend Diego, exactly as I'd suspected. The FBI was preparing arrest warrants for Marcus and Rebecca based on the new evidence of paternity fraud and conspiracy to commit identity theft, but the legal system would only be the beginning of their problems. At 10:30 p.m., I began the invocation ritual. Madame Zelda had warned me that the process would be physically and spiritually demanding. I would be channeling supernatural forces powerful enough to rewrite the fundamental nature of a soul binding, and such energy didn't flow without cost. I stood at the foot of the bed, my hands raised toward the soul contract, and began to recite the ancient words that would invoke the snapback clause. I call upon the powers that witness all contracts, that judge all betrayals, that balance all spiritual debts. Marcus Morrison has violated the sacred trust that bound his soul to mine, and in doing so, has forfeited his right to spiritual autonomy. The candles flared higher, their flames dancing without any wind to disturb them. The salt circle began to glow with that same inner light I'd noticed before, but brighter now, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. He has planned the sacrifice of innocent souls for material gain. He has betrayed the mother of the child he claimed as his own. He has stolen the life savings of those who trusted him. He has conspired to destroy the woman who supported his rise to power. The parchment of the soul contract began to smoke, though no flame touched it. Marcus's signature writhed on the page as if the ink were alive, trying to escape the consequences he'd bound himself to accept. By the law of supernatural justice, by the power of broken trust made manifest, by the weight of betrayal that cries out for balance, I invoke the snapback clause of this soul contract. Let Marcus Morrison's spiritual essence be bound to my will with exponential force, now and forever, until justice is served and the innocent are protected. The room exploded with light, not the warm glow of candles, but the harsh brilliance of cosmic judgment. I felt power rushing through me like lightning, filling every cell of my body with energy that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The soul contract burst into flames that burned without heat, consuming the parchment while leaving Marcus's signature floating in the air like a brand burned into reality itself. And then, abruptly, everything went silent. The candles returned to their normal flickering. The salt circle's glow faded to a subtle shimmer. The floating signature settled back onto the bed as a small pile of silver ash that gleamed like powdered starlight, but I could feel the change immediately. Where before I'd felt drained and weakened by the reversed binding, now I was filled with a vital energy that seemed to extend far beyond my own body. I could sense Marcus's location, still at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and feel his sudden confusion as the power dynamic between us shifted without warning. My phone rang exactly at midnight. Marcus's number. Evangeline? His voice was wrong, strained, frightened, younger somehow. Something's happening to me. I can't make decisions. Every time I try to think about leaving the hotel, my body just stops moving. Hello, Marcus, I replied, settling into the chair where I'd spent so many evenings reading while he played on his phone. How are you feeling? What did you do? The fear in his voice was delicious. Rebecca says you've been practicing some kind of witchcraft, but I didn't believe her. This isn't possible. Oh, it's very possible. In fact, it's inevitable. You violated a soul contract, Marcus. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? The contract reversed. Rebecca showed me the documentation. You can't, I can, I interrupted gently. Because you committed a greater betrayal after claiming ownership of my soul. The moment you decided to sacrifice Jessica and her baby for your escape plan, you triggered the snapback clause. Now your soul belongs to me, completely and permanently. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. What does that mean? It means you can't leave that hotel room without my permission. It means you can't make any significant decisions without my approval. It means that for the rest of your natural life, you are bound to serve my will. I paused, savoring the moment. It means you are, in every way that matters, my property. Rebecca will find a way to break this, he said, but the conviction was already leaving his voice. She knows supernatural law. She can. Rebecca is going to be very busy with her own problems, I said, pulling up the latest FBI reports on my laptop. The federal agents raided her office 20 minutes ago. Apparently, someone provided them with detailed evidence of her involvement in multiple investment fraud schemes. She's currently in federal custody, and her law license has been suspended pending investigation. That someone had been me, of course. The moment the snapback ritual was complete, I'd sent comprehensive evidence packages to the FBI, the state bar association, and the IRS. Rebecca's countermagic expertise wouldn't help her against mundane criminal charges. You're destroying everything, Marcus whispered. I'm restoring balance, I corrected. You tried to steal $50 million from innocent people. You planned to abandon a pregnant woman and claim her child as your own. You attempted to frame me for your crimes and leave me to rot in federal prison. Did you really think such actions wouldn't have consequences? Through the supernatural bond that now connected us, I could feel Marcus's growing panic as he began to understand the true scope of his situation. He tried to stand up, probably planning to run, but his legs wouldn't obey him. He attempted to call another lawyer, but his fingers couldn't dial the number. He even tried to throw his phone against the wall in frustration, but his arms stopped moving mid-swing. This is what you wanted, isn't it? I continued conversationally. Complete control over someone else's life? The power to make decisions for another person without their consent? You've got it, Marcus. Except now you're the one being controlled. Evangeline. Please, he begged. I'll make it right. I'll return the money, I'll confess to everything, I'll leave you alone forever. Just let me go. Oh, you will confess to everything, I agreed. In fact, you're going to confess to crimes I haven't even discovered yet. You're going to cooperate fully with federal investigators and help them recover every penny you stole. You're going to provide testimony that ensures all your co-conspirators face justice. And then you'll release me? I laughed, the sound echoing through the empty bedroom. Marcus, you really don't understand what permanently bound means, do you? There is no and then. There is no release clause. There is no escape. The supernatural binding was more comprehensive than I'd even expected. Through our connection, I could access his memories, feel his emotions, even influence his thoughts. I could see the full scope of his crimes laid out like an open book, not just the $50 million he'd stolen from investors, but the smaller betrayals, the tax evasion, the bribes paid to building inspectors, the threats made to competitors, and I could see his plans for me. The confession letter he'd wanted me to sign was just the beginning. He'd been preparing to have me committed to a psychiatric facility once I'd served my purpose as a scapegoat, claiming that the stress of my supposed crimes had caused a mental breakdown. Rebecca had already found doctors willing to testify that my belief in supernatural contracts was evidence of delusional thinking. You were going to have me declared insane, I said, my voice turning cold. Even after stealing my assets, even after framing me for your crimes, you were planning to take away my freedom and my sanity as well. Evangeline, no more lies, Marcus. I can see your thoughts now. I know about Dr. Harrison and the psychiatric evaluation you'd already paid for. I know about the forged medical records Rebecca prepared. I know about your plan to have me drugged and committed the moment I signed those transfer papers. Through our bond, I felt his despair as he realized that all his secrets were now mine to explore. Every hidden account, every buried crime, every moment of cruelty he'd thought was safely concealed, I had access to all of it. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice taking on the authoritative tone I used in court. Tomorrow morning, you're going to surrender yourself to federal authorities. You're going to confess to every crime you've committed and provide complete documentation of your financial schemes. You're going to ensure that every investor receives full restitution from your hidden accounts. I don't have enough to pay everyone back, he protested weakly. You do now, I replied, accessing the supernatural knowledge that came with owning his soul. Including the accounts you never told Rebecca about. The ones in Switzerland and Singapore that you were planning to use for your final escape. Those belong to me now, which means they'll be used to repair the damage you've caused. Marcus was crying now, actual tears of fear and desperation as the reality of his permanent bondage settled over him. What about Jessica? What about the baby? Jessica will receive full citizenship and support for herself and her child. Diego, the baby's real father, will be contacted and given the opportunity to be part of his child's life if he chooses. They'll both receive college funds from your Swiss accounts as compensation for the trauma you put them through. And me? I considered the question, feeling the vast scope of possibilities that came with owning another person's soul. I could make him suffer endlessly, force him to experience every moment of pain he'd inflicted on others. I could drive him insane with guilt and remorse, or strip away his memories and leave him a hollow shell, but that would make me no better than him. You'll serve your time in federal prison, I said finally. All of it, probably 20 to 30 years based on the scope of your crimes. But you'll do it with the knowledge that your victims have been made whole, that your stolen money has been returned, that the people you tried to destroy have been restored. And after that? After that, you'll spend the rest of your life making amends. Community service, victim advocacy, financial literacy education for vulnerable populations. You'll use whatever skills you have left to help people instead of exploiting them. Through our supernatural connection, I planted the seeds of genuine remorse in his consciousness, not false guilt designed to torture him, but real understanding of the harm he caused and sincere desire to make things right. It would take time to grow, but it would ensure that his cooperation was authentic rather than forced. The soul binding will ensure you never hurt innocent people again, I explained. You'll find it physically impossible to lie, cheat, steal, or manipulate. You'll experience genuine empathy for others, perhaps for the first time in your adult life. In a way, Marcus, I'm giving you the opportunity to become the man you should have been all along. The call ended with Marcus sobbing into his phone, the sound of a broken man finally confronting the consequences of his choices. But through our bond, I could feel something else beginning to stir in his consciousness, relief. Relief that the constant scheming and lying and manipulation were finally over. Relief that he would never again have to maintain the exhausting facade of caring about other people while secretly planning their destruction. The soul binding hadn't just made him my property, it had freed him from the prison of his own sociopathy. I spent the rest of the night making calls to federal prosecutors, victim advocacy groups, and financial recovery specialists. By dawn, the machinery of justice would be in motion, powered by the supernatural certainty that Marcus would cooperate fully and honestly with every investigation. But as the first light of morning streamed through the bedroom windows, I realized that my own transformation was just beginning. The power that came with owning another person's soul was intoxicating, and I would need to be very careful not to become the kind of person Marcus had been, someone who saw others as tools to be used rather than people to be respected. After all, the greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's becoming so much better than them that their very existence serves as a testament to your superiority, and I had plans for both Marcus and myself that would ensure justice was served for decades to come. 3 months had passed since the night I reclaimed Marcus's soul, and the world had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. I stood in my office, the same office I'd thought I'd lost forever, reviewing the latest victim restitution reports. Every investor Marcus had defrauded had received full compensation, plus interest, from his hidden accounts. The elderly couple whose retirement savings he'd stolen were now living comfortably in a paid-off home. The pension fund he'd raided had been restored to solvency. Justice, it turned out, was far more satisfying than revenge had ever been. Marcus himself was currently serving a 30-year sentence in minimum security federal prison, where he'd become something of a model inmate. The supernatural binding had ensured his complete cooperation with investigators, leading to the recovery of over $80 million in stolen assets that even the FBI hadn't known existed. More importantly, the empathy I'd planted in his consciousness had taken root, transforming him from a narcissistic sociopath into someone capable of genuine remorse. His prison letters arrived weekly, meticulously detailing his progress in victim advocacy training and financial literacy education programs. Each letter was a testament to the man he was becoming, someone who finally understood the pain he caused and was determined to spend the rest of his life making amends. Mrs. Cross? My assistant knocked on the door, interrupting my review of the latest reports. Jessica Martinez is here for her appointment. Send her in, please. Jessica entered my office carrying a beautiful baby girl, her daughter Sophia, named after Jessica's grandmother. The young woman who'd once been Marcus's pregnant mistress had transformed into a confident mother and college student, her citizenship secured and her future bright with possibility. Evangeline, she smiled, settling Sophia in her arms. Thank you for meeting with us. How are your classes going? I asked, gesturing for her to sit. The college fund I'd established from Marcus's Swiss accounts was paying for Jessica's education in child development, a field she'd discovered she was passionate about. Better than I ever imagined. I'm actually thinking about graduate school now, maybe becoming a family therapist who specializes in helping women who've been manipulated by men like Marcus. She paused, her expression growing serious. I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done. Not just the money, but for helping me see the truth about what Marcus was really planning. You don't need to thank me, Jessica. You were as much a victim as anyone else. But I was also the other woman, she said quietly. I helped destroy your marriage, even if I didn't understand what I was really part of. I considered her words carefully. Jessica, you were 24 years old and pregnant when Marcus manipulated you into his schemes. You believed his lies. Because they were expertly crafted by someone with decades of experience in deception. The only person responsible for destroying my marriage was Marcus himself. Baby Sophia gurgled and reached for the small silver bell I kept on my desk, a gift from Madame Zelda that helped focus spiritual energy. The child seemed unusually drawn to objects with supernatural significance, something I'd noticed during their previous visits. Have you heard from Diego recently? I asked, referring to Sophia's biological father. Jessica's face lit up. He's flying in next weekend to spend time with Sophia. We're taking things slowly, but I think there might be a future there. A real one this time, built on honesty instead of lies. I'm glad to hear it. What about you? Jessica asked. I know the divorce was finalized last month. Any thoughts about dating again? I laughed, thinking about the various men who'd tried to court me since Marcus's imprisonment. Successful attorneys, wealthy businessmen, even a few actors and politicians, all drawn by the combination of my restored fortune and the mysterious circumstances surrounding my ex-husband's downfall. I'm in no hurry, I replied honestly. I'm enjoying the freedom to focus on my work without worrying about whether my partner is secretly plotting my destruction. The supernatural law practice is really taking off, isn't it? Indeed it was. Word had spread quietly through certain circles about my success in enforcing a soul contract against a man who tried to use countermagic against me. My client list now included several Fortune 500 CEOs, Hollywood producers, and even a few foreign diplomats, all seeking contracts that would be binding on more than just the earthly plane. People are beginning to understand that some agreements require more than conventional legal enforcement, I said carefully. Jessica knew about the supernatural aspects of my case, but I was still cautious about discussing the details of my expanded practice. Speaking of which, Jessica leaned forward conspiratorially. I heard through Diego that Rebecca Chen is being investigated for supernatural malpractice. I nodded grimly. Rebecca's disbarment had been just the beginning of her troubles. When the supernatural law community learned that she'd been using countermagic to help clients break legitimate soul contracts, they'd taken swift and decisive action. She was currently facing charges before the Arcane Legal Council, a shadowy organization that governed supernatural jurisprudence worldwide. She'll be lucky if they only strip her of her magical abilities, I said. Using countermagic to facilitate fraud violates some very ancient and very serious spiritual laws. What happens to people who violate those laws? Let's just say that conventional prison is considered a mercy compared to supernatural punishment. I changed the subject before Jessica could ask for details she wasn't ready to hear. How's your mother doing? Much better. The money you provided for her medical treatments worked miracles. The doctors say her cancer is in complete remission. Now. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to repay you for everything you've done for my family. You repay me by living a good life and raising that beautiful daughter to be strong and honest. That's all the payment I need. After Jessica left, I turned to the stack of new case files on my desk. Each one represented someone who discovered that conventional contracts weren't sufficient to protect them from particularly sophisticated forms of betrayal. A tech entrepreneur whose business partner was planning to steal his company through occult manipulation. A widow whose stepchildren were using supernatural coercion to claim her inheritance. A whistleblower who needed protection from corporate executives with access to dangerous spiritual practices. The world, I'd learned, was full of people who thought they could cheat and manipulate and betray without consequences. My job was to ensure they were wrong. My phone buzzed with a text message from David, my private investigator. Updates on the Morrison case. You'll want to see this. The attached files contain surveillance footage from Marcus's prison, showing him during his weekly video call with his mother. But this wasn't the arrogant, manipulative man I'd been married to for 8 years. This was someone transformed, genuinely contrite, patiently explaining to his mother why he couldn't accept money for his commissary account because every dollar should go to his victims instead. I know it's hard to understand, Mom, his voice came through clearly on the recording. But I hurt a lot of people, and I need to make that right. Evangeline is giving me the chance to become someone worth respecting again. I can't waste that gift. The supernatural binding had accomplished something I'd never expected. It had made Marcus genuinely grateful for his imprisonment and the opportunity it provided for redemption. He understood now that his freedom had been a trap, allowing him to accumulate spiritual debts that would have eventually destroyed not just his victims, but his own soul. A soft knock on my door interrupted my review of the prison footage. Come in. Madame Zelda entered, carrying her familiar leather satchel of mystical implements. Despite being in her 70s, she moved with the grace of someone half her age, her silver hair braided with small charms that chimed softly as she walked. Little Evie, she said with affection, settling into the chair across from my desk. You've been busy. The Morrison case has opened doors I never expected, I admitted. Half the supernatural legal community wants to consult with me now. And the other half wants to challenge you, Madame Zelda observed with a knowing smile. Power always draws both admirers and enemies. How are you handling the responsibility? It was a question I'd been grappling with for months. The soul binding hadn't just given me control over Marcus, it had amplified my own spiritual abilities exponentially. I could sense deception from across a room, influence the outcome of legal proceedings through focused intention, and access levels of mystical knowledge that had previously been beyond my reach. Some days I feel like I'm drowning in it, I confessed. The temptation to use these abilities for personal gain is significant. But you resist. I try to. Marcus is a constant reminder of what happens when someone lets power corrupt them. Completely. I see him in myself sometimes, the potential for arrogance, for seeing other people as tools instead of individuals with their own rights and dignity. Madame Zelda reached into her satchel and withdrew a small, intricately carved mirror made from black obsidian. This belonged to your grandmother, she said, placing it on my desk. She asked me to give it to you when you were ready to understand its significance. I stared at the mirror, which reflected not my physical appearance but something deeper, my spiritual essence, complete with the golden threads that connected me to Marcus and the silver aura that marked me as someone who wielded supernatural justice. My grandmother practiced supernatural law. Where do you think you inherited the ability? Madame Zelda chuckled. Your grandmother was one of the most powerful practitioners of spiritual jurisprudence in her generation. She helped establish many of the protocols we still use today for enforcing soul contracts. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because the ability had to manifest naturally, without outside influence. If you'd known about your heritage, you might have relied on tradition instead of developing your own unique approach to supernatural justice. I picked up the obsidian mirror, feeling the weight of generations of wisdom flowing through the carved surface. In its depths, I could see not just my own spiritual reflection, but glimpses of possible futures, paths where I used my power wisely, and darker possibilities where I became the kind of person Marcus had been. The binding with Marcus is permanent, Madame Zelda continued. But it's also evolving. As he becomes more genuinely remorseful and dedicates himself to making amends, the spiritual connection between you will shift from dominance to something more collaborative. What does that mean? It means that eventually, Marcus will choose to serve justice not because he's compelled to, but because he genuinely wants to. When that transformation is complete, the binding will become a partnership rather than ownership. The idea was both fascinating and terrifying. Marcus, as my willing partner in supernatural justice, helping to identify and stop others like his former self? It was either the ultimate redemption story or the setup for an even more complex betrayal. How will I know when that transformation is complete? You'll know, Madame Zelda said simply. And when it happens, you'll have to decide whether you trust the man he's becoming enough to share your power with him. After Madame Zelda left, I spent the evening reviewing the case files for my newest clients. Each one represented someone who discovered that conventional justice wasn't sufficient to address the spiritual dimensions of betrayal and exploitation. They needed protection that went beyond restraining orders and financial settlements. They needed supernatural enforcement of cosmic justice. As midnight approached, I felt the familiar stirring of the soul binding that connected me to Marcus. He was having another nightmare about his victims, experiencing their pain and fear as if it were his own. But instead of trying to escape the dreams, he was embracing them as part of his penance, using them to fuel his determination to make amends. Through our connection, I sent him a message of acknowledgement, not forgiveness, which hadn't been earned yet, but recognition of his efforts to become someone worthy of eventual redemption. His response came back immediately, gratitude mixed with renewed commitment to justice. And something else, genuine affection for the woman who'd given him the chance to become more than the sum of his crimes. It would be years before I could trust those feelings, decades before the spiritual binding might evolve into the partnership Madame Zelda had described. But for the first time since discovering his betrayal, I could imagine a future where Marcus Morrison existed as something other than my supernatural prisoner. The clock struck midnight, marking exactly 3 months since the night I'd reclaimed my soul and bound his to my will. In that time, we'd restored millions of dollars to fraud victims, prevented other supernatural practitioners from exploiting vulnerable clients, and established precedents that would protect countless future victims of spiritual manipulation. Most importantly, we'd proven that justice, real justice, was possible even in cases where conventional law enforcement fell short. I picked up my grandmother's obsidian mirror one final time, studying my reflection in its mystical depths. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized, stronger, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous than the naive wife who'd first suspected her husband's infidelity, but she was also someone who understood that true power came not from dominating others, but from protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As I prepared for bed in the master suite that had once been the site of my greatest humiliation, I reflected on the strange turns my life had taken. A year ago, I'd been Dr. Evangeline Cross, successful contract lawyer with a cheating husband and a comfortable but ultimately hollow existence. Now I was Dr. Evangeline Cross, supernatural justice practitioner with a soul-bound ex-husband and the power to enforce cosmic accountability on those who thought themselves above the law. The change, I decided, was definitely an improvement. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new challenges, and new opportunities to ensure that betrayal carried appropriate consequences. The world was full of people like Marcus, narcissists and sociopaths who viewed others as tools to be exploited, but it was also full of potential victims who deserved protection, and as long as I wielded the power to provide that protection, I would ensure that soul contracts weren't the only supernatural force maintaining the balance between justice and corruption. After all, some debts transcend the physical world, and some forms of justice require more than earthly enforcement. The deed to Marcus's soul would remain in my possession forever, a reminder of the price of ultimate betrayal and the power of perfect revenge. But more than that, it had become the foundation of something larger, a practice dedicated to ensuring that those who preyed on the innocent would face consequences that extended far beyond any conventional court of law. In the end, Marcus had been right about one thing: our marriage was definitely over, but our partnership in cosmic justice? That was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload.